What if the wounds Padre Pio carried weren't just symbolic? What if I told you that the Vatican once tried to silence him, that he reportedly appeared in 2 places at once, that demons tried to kill him in his sleep, and yet millions around the world still believe he was one of the greatest mystics of the 20th century, a man chosen to suffer, to bleed, and to battle evil on behalf of others. This isn't just a story about a Catholic priest. It's about a man whose life blurred the line between the natural and the supernatural, whose prayer could heal, whose eyes could see souls, and whose hands bore the same wounds as Christ. But why was he silenced? What was so dangerous about Padre Pio's life that parts of it were covered up, and only now are beginning to emerge? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear may forever change the way you see faith, suffering, and the power of prayer. This is the untold truth of Padre Pio. Francesco Forgione, the boy who would become Padre Pio, was born on May 25, 1887, in a humble farmhouse in Pietrelcina, a small village nestled in the southern hills of Italy. His family was poor but deeply devout. They lived modestly, relying on the land and the strength of their Catholic faith to survive. Francesco's parents, Grazio and Maria Giuseppa Forgione, were simple people who believed in prayer, penance, and the power of God's mercy. From the earliest days of his life, Francesco was not like other children. He was sickly, often bedridden, and suffered from mysterious fevers and illnesses. But more than his physical fragility, it was his intense spiritual sensitivity that set him apart. As a child, he claimed to see angels and demons. He spoke openly about his visions of Jesus and the Virgin Mary, and unlike other children, he seemed drawn to solitude, prayer, and sacrifice. At just 5 years old, Francesco reportedly made a solemn vow of chastity. He prayed daily, fasted voluntarily, and often inflicted small acts of penance upon himself. His desire to dedicate his life to God was clear from the beginning, even if those around him didn't fully understand the depth of his calling. When he turned 15, he joined the Capuchin Franciscan friars in Morcone, taking the name Brother Pio in honor of Pope St. Pius V. It was here that his inner world deepened dramatically. The monastery was a place of silence, prayer, and asceticism. Pio embraced it all, not out of obligation, but from an almost supernatural longing for union with God. He immersed himself in the practices of the Franciscan order: poverty, chastity, obedience, and humility. He spent hours in the chapel, knelt in adoration, and fasted for days. But even as he gave himself more completely to God, he was haunted by what he later described as the devil's fury. Pio's health declined rapidly during his novitiate. Doctors couldn't explain his chronic bronchitis, painful stomach issues, or extreme fatigue. Yet he insisted that his suffering had meaning, that it was a kind of participation in Christ's own agony. During one of his hospital stays, he had a vision that would stay with him for the rest of his life. A majestic man with a radiant face and a long beard appeared to him and encouraged him to embrace his cross with courage. Later, Pio would say that he believed this figure was Christ himself. Even before his ordination in 1910, Pio was already being spoken of in whispers, not just as a holy man, but as someone touched by the divine. Fellow friars observed unusual things: a strong scent of roses emanating from his room, his ability to know what others were thinking, and an unearthly peace that surrounded him even in his worst illnesses. He was ordained a priest on August 10, 1910, but due to his failing health, he was permitted to live outside the monastery, returning to Pietrelcina for several years. There, in his quiet hometown, he celebrated Mass, heard confessions, and walked the narrow dirt paths between the fields. Yet even in this ordinary setting, extraordinary things continued to unfold. Villagers reported strange lights in his room during prayer, Some swore they saw him levitate. Others claimed that just being near him brought healing or deep peace. And Padre Pio, for all his mystical experiences, remained profoundly humble. He never boasted. He often wept after Mass, overwhelmed by the miracle of the Eucharist. He called himself a simple friar who prayed. But the deeper his connection with the divine became, the more intense the spiritual warfare grew, and soon the entire world would take notice. For Padre Pio, holiness did not mean peace. It meant war. An invisible, relentless war that few could see, and even fewer could understand. From his earliest years in the monastery, Padre Pio reported violent encounters with demonic forces. These were not symbolic or psychological experiences. They were tangible, physical assaults. He described being dragged from his bed, hurled against the wall, beaten, scratched, and tormented through the night by what he called the Evil One. The friars at San Giovanni Rotondo sometimes heard the noises, thuds, guttural voices, furniture shaking in his room. But when they opened the door, all they saw was Padre Pio, collapsed on the floor, bruised and exhausted, his face pale but filled with divine resolve. He once wrote to his spiritual director, "The devil wants me for himself at all costs. He is throwing himself at me with all his strength, but I am not afraid. Jesus is with me." This spiritual warfare was not occasional. It was constant. It grew more intense as his reputation for holiness and healing spread. Some nights he was attacked so brutally that he could hardly walk the next day. Yet he still insisted on celebrating Mass, often leaning on other friars for support, his body trembling, but his spirit aflame. Padre Pio believed that the devil focused so intently on him, not because of his power, but because of his humility. The more he emptied himself, the more he became a threat to darkness. He also claimed to have the gift of discernment, the ability to sense spiritual realities, to see souls in torment, and to identify demonic influences in the lives of the faithful. Many pilgrims who came to him described feeling a force they couldn't explain, a spiritual clarity, a confrontation with their own sins, or a sense of deep deliverance. Not everyone believed him. Some thought he was exaggerating or mentally unstable. But too many witnesses, too many letters, too many events aligned to ignore the truth. Padre Pio was in a constant battle not just for himself, but for the souls of others. He called it his invisible martyrdom. One of the most chilling episodes came when he reportedly told a penitent not to receive communion until they confessed a sin they had hidden for years. The person broke down in tears, stunned. How could this friar know their darkest secret? Padre Pio said nothing more, only that the devil tried to mask sin in silence. He wore a spiritual armor of prayer, the Rosary, the Eucharist, Scripture, and a fierce devotion to Saint Michael the Archangel. He was often heard praying aloud at night, battling through the darkness, invoking heaven with tears and groans. "Leave me alone, Satan," he would cry. "My heart belongs to Jesus." These were not the dramatic outbursts of a mystic seeking attention. They were the daily reality of a soul who lived fully aware of the invisible realm. Padre Pio once warned a young seminarian, "Do not underestimate the enemy. He is strong, but prayer is stronger, and when you suffer for Christ, the devil trembles." It was not just his stigmata or miracles that made him extraordinary. It was his endurance, his willingness to suffer silently, to carry not just the weight of his own soul, but the battles of thousands who came to him seeking freedom. He never asked for this war, but he never retreated from it, and the marks of that war would soon become visible in his very flesh. It was the morning of September 20th, 1918. Padre Pio knelt in deep prayer after celebrating Mass. He had been experiencing visions and intense spiritual ecstasy for weeks, but this day was different. As he lowered his head in front of the crucifix in the small choir loft of the church in San Giovanni Rotondo, Something mysterious and terrifying began to happen. He later described seeing a mysterious being, a celestial figure whose face he could never fully recall. The being radiated both beauty and pain, and as it appeared before him, rays of light, like piercing flames, shot from its hands, feet, and side. Padre Pio fell unconscious. When he awoke, he felt a burning pain throughout his body. He looked down and saw blood. His hands, feet, and side were wounded, open, bleeding, and inexplicable. He had received the stigmata, the visible wounds of Christ. What followed was a storm of awe, suspicion, and controversy. Friars who saw the wounds firsthand were stunned. They reported a sweet fragrance like roses and violets coming from the blood. Padre Pio tried to hide the wounds, wearing gloves and long robes, but they continued to bleed, sometimes profusely, and without infection. Medical doctors examined him, unable to explain how the wounds could persist for so long without decaying or healing. They offered no scientific explanation. He was not the first to receive the stigmata, but he would become the most famous. The Vatican sent investigators. Some doubted his sincerity, others suspected psychological causes or even self-infliction. Padre Pio never defended himself. He simply said, "I am only a poor friar who prays." For the next 50 years he carried these wounds. He bled daily. His masses became deeply mystical events, lasting for hours, as he wept and visibly suffered at the altar. People traveled from around the world to witness them. They saw a man absorbed in God, whispering prayers with tears rolling down his face, often pausing mid-liturgical sentence, as if conversing with someone unseen. The stigmata transformed his life into a living icon of Christ's passion. But for Padre Pio, the stigmata were not a badge of honor, they were a burden. He often prayed for the wounds to be taken away, at least the visible signs, so he could live in anonymity. He feared that attention would distract from God's glory. Despite this, the phenomenon brought millions to his door. People came seeking miracles, forgiveness, and to simply see with their own eyes a man who bore the same wounds as Jesus. And there were miracles. Stories of instant healings after touching his gloves, of conversions upon seeing his eyes, of people collapsing in repentance just hearing him speak. But always, Padre Pio pointed to Christ, not himself. "It is not I who do these things," he would say. "It is God who works through my wounds." His stigmata for many became a bridge between the visible and invisible, between the suffering of Christ and the suffering of modern man. And yet, this visible holiness also attracted powerful enemies within the church and beyond, because what could be more dangerous than a man who bleeds with Christ's wounds and asks for nothing in return? It wasn't just the stigmata that drew people to Padre Pio. It was the unexplainable healings, the inner conversions, the inexplicable presence of divine grace that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Word of Padre Pio's miraculous abilities spread like wildfire. From tiny villages in Italy to cities across Europe and even America, people came in droves to San Giovanni Rotondo. Many arrived sick, broken, terminally ill. Others came with shattered faith, addictions, or unbearable grief. And thousands left transformed. There are countless testimonies. A young blind girl who regained her sight after receiving a blessing. A cancer-stricken mother who, after touching one of Padre Pio's gloves, found her tumor gone. A soldier declared dead who suddenly revived, whispering that Padre Pio had visited him in the hospital room dressed in brown. And then there were the healings that couldn't be seen, the healing of hearts, of addictions, of lifelong guilt. People would stand in line for 10, 12, even 18 hours just to make a confession to him. Somehow, Padre Pio always knew their sins, even those they forgot to confess. "Either you tell me everything," he would gently say, "or I will." He wasn't harsh, he was loving, but his love burned. It purified. People left his confessional in tears, often shaken but free. He was said to bilocate, appear in two places at once. Numerous witnesses claim he visited them in dreams or appeared at their bedside during emergencies, though he never left the monastery. One World War II pilot testified that while flying over San Giovanni Rotondo with orders to bomb the area, he saw a bearded friar in the sky raising his hands, and his aircraft controls froze. He turned around and later recognized the friar as Padre Pio. Despite the miracles, Padre Pio always refused praise. "It is Jesus who heals, not I," he insisted. "I am only his instrument." Doctors, skeptics, even atheists came to disprove him. Many left converted. The Vatican documented numerous healings. Still, Padre Pio never made a show of miracles. In fact, he often tried to hide them. He prayed tirelessly for the sick. He wrote letters to people he'd never met, offering hope and spiritual guidance. He wore gloves to cover the stigmata, not just for modesty, but to direct attention back to Christ. People came looking for signs and wonders, but most left with something more powerful: the conviction that God was real and that he still intervened in human suffering. To this day, thousands of verified testimonials from those who visited him continue to surface. In hospital rooms, battlefields, and broken homes, Padre Pio's intercession seemed to reach people at the exact moment they needed it. And even after death, those miracles didn't stop. But behind every miracle was a cross, and behind every healing, a price Padre Pio silently paid. As Padre Pio's fame spread and pilgrims flooded to San Giovanni Rotondo, not everyone rejoiced. Within the very institution he vowed to serve, the Church, suspicion began to grow. It began subtly. Letters of concern were sent to Rome by fellow clergy, who feared that the attention Padre Pio received might breed fanaticism, or worse, scandal. How could a man exhibit the stigmata for years without infection? How did he know people's sins? Could it be fraud, hysteria, or delusion? The Vatican launched investigations. Reports were compiled, some glowing, others scathing. Doctors and theologians alike examined him, some with reverence, others with skepticism. The scrutiny intensified after World War I, when Padre Pio's mystical reputation exploded. Then came the restrictions. In 1923, the Holy Office, predecessor of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, issued its first ruling. Padre Pio was forbidden from celebrating public Mass and hearing confessions. A wall of silence descended on the friary. Those who had come seeking comfort were turned away. Some wept, others protested. But Padre Pio accepted the decision with obedience. He was crushed, but he never rebelled. Letters from this period reveal his heartbreak. "The more I am slandered, the more I feel the need to love and forgive," he wrote. "God is my witness, I seek no attention." In 1931, the sanctions grew heavier. He was essentially isolated within the friary. Only his superiors could speak to him directly. Even his confessions were restricted. The faithful, confused and hurt, wrote by the thousands to Rome. And yet Padre Pio remained silent. He did not defend himself. He offered his suffering as prayer. Whispers emerged that some within the Vatican feared his influence. The growing cult of devotion, the unexplained phenomena, and the fervor of those who called him a living saint. But slowly, as the years passed, perspectives began to shift. Doctors submitted medical reports confirming the supernatural nature of his wounds. Pilgrims shared thousands of testimonies. Bishops who had once doubted him became believers. And Pope Pius XIII himself reportedly encouraged people to visit Padre Pio, recognizing that something beyond understanding was taking place. By the late 1930s and early 1940s, restrictions began to lift. Padre Pio returned to public ministry. His confessional lines once again stretched for blocks. His masses drew thousands. And the man who had been silenced, who never defended himself, was now quietly regarded as a vessel of grace. But he never forgot those years of persecution. He once told a fellow friar, The Church is my mother, and just as a mother may discipline her child, she never ceases to love him. Through persecution, Padre Pio demonstrated the ultimate obedience, not to a claim, but to Christ crucified. He suffered in silence, trusted in God's justice, and remained faithful even when betrayed by those closest to him. And through that suffering, his sanctity was refined. The Church that once doubted him would later raise him to its altars. But first, he had to endure the silence and prove, not by words, but by wounds, that he was exactly who God called him to be. What Padre Pio left behind was far more than relics, letters, or memories. His legacy is spiritual, a living fire that continues to burn in the hearts of millions. It's not just what he did during his lifetime, but what his life still says today. At the heart of Padre Pio's spirituality was a radical devotion to Christ crucified. He believed that suffering, when united to the cross, became redemptive. This was not mere theory. It was how he lived. For Padre Pio, pain was not a punishment. It was a gift, a means to draw closer to God and intercede for others. His spirituality emphasized daily participation in the sacraments, especially the Eucharist and confession. He called the Eucharist the center of my life, and often said that the altar was his true battlefield. His masses were profound and mystical, filled with silent tears and visible reverence. He also became known as an extraordinary confessor. He would sit for 10 to 12 hours a day, hearing confessions, offering both mercy and truth. To Padre Pio, confession wasn't just a sacrament, it was surgery for the soul. He told the faithful, "Confession is the soul's bath. You must go at least once a week." His devotion to the Virgin Mary was unwavering. He constantly prayed the Rosary, sometimes dozens of times a day, and encouraged others to do the same. "The Rosary," he once said, "is the weapon for these times." In spiritual direction, he encouraged simplicity, honesty, and perseverance. He warned against spiritual pride and sensationalism. He constantly reminded people that holiness is not about visions or miracles, but about love, humility, and obedience. Perhaps one of the most profound elements of his legacy is his deep compassion. Padre Pio saw through people's facades. He met them in their pain, and even when he corrected or challenged them, it was always with the goal of restoring them to grace. He once said, "Pray, hope, and don't worry. Worry is useless. God is merciful and will hear your prayer." That phrase, "Pray, hope, and don't worry," became his spiritual motto and is still quoted around the world today. His spiritual children, those who considered him their father in faith, number in the millions now. Many religious vocations, conversions, and ministries trace their origin back to a moment with Padre Pio, a confession, a blessing, a word of encouragement. Even decades after his death, Padre Pio's influence grows. Pilgrims continue to visit his shrine. New miracles are reported. Books, documentaries, and testimonies continue to reveal how his life touched people across every continent. More than a mystic, more than a stigmatic, Padre Pio became a model of fidelity in a world of compromise, a voice of heaven in a world drowning in noise. And through his life and legacy, countless hearts have found their way back to God. By the late 1960s, Padre Pio was a frail but spiritually radiant man. Decades of suffering, mystical experiences, and service had taken a toll on his body, but not his spirit. He remained in San Giovanni Rotondo, living a simple life of prayer, confession, and daily mass, even as his fame continued to grow. He had become a global figure. Letters poured in daily, hundreds, sometimes thousands, from people all over the world. Some sought healing. Others asked for guidance. Many just needed hope. Despite his declining health, Padre Pio continued to write, pray, and minister to those who came to him. He often said, "I will do more after my death," and many believe he has. On the night of September 22nd, 1968, Padre Pio celebrated his final Mass. He was weak and had to be helped to the altar. But even then, he offered the Eucharist with the same reverence and devotion that had marked his life. After Mass, he was taken to his room. There, in the quiet of the friary, surrounded by his brothers in faith, Padre Pio whispered his final words. Jesus, Maria. Jesus, Mary. He died in the early hours of September 23, 1968, at the age of 81. As he passed, the stigmata that had bled for 50 years vanished without a trace. News of his death spread quickly. Tens of thousands came to view his body, which remained incorrupt and peaceful. The line of mourners stretched for miles. Many wept not just for a man, but for a spiritual father, a living saint who had carried their burdens as if they were his own. The process of canonization began almost immediately. In 1999, Pope John Paul II beatified Padre Pio. Just 3 years later, on June 16, 2002, he was canonized as St. Pio of Pietrelcina before an enormous crowd in St. Peter's Square. In his homily, Pope John Paul II, who had once met Padre Pio as a young priest, spoke of him with deep affection. The life and mission of Padre Pio testify that difficulties and sorrows, if accepted with love, transform into a privileged path of holiness. Since then, devotion to Padre Pio has only increased. San Giovanni Rotondo has become one of the most visited pilgrimage sites in the world, drawing over 7 million people annually. The sanctuary built in his honor houses his remains in a crystal tomb, and many claim to experience miracles just by being near it. Statues, chapels, shrines, and churches dedicated to Padre Pio have been erected across the globe, from Italy to the Philippines, from the United States to South America. His image appears in homes, hospitals, and even prison cells. His prayers are recited daily by the faithful, and his famous quotes inspire people in times of fear, illness, or doubt. And yet, for all his fame, Padre Pio remains a profoundly personal saint. He is not adored because of spectacle, but because of empathy. People feel that he understands them, their pain, their fears, their silent struggles. They see in him a reflection of Christ's suffering and love. To this day, stories of dreams, visions, and answered prayers through Padre Pio's intercession continue to emerge. Each testimony becomes part of a growing chorus that this humble friar who bore Christ's wounds is still at work. Padre Pio's death did not end his mission, it magnified it. For all his public holiness, Padre Pio was at the center of whispers and secrets, some known, others buried deep in Vatican archives. Behind the devotion, the miracles, and the incense, there were things spoken only in closed-door meetings, things they didn't want the faithful to know. Why? Because Padre Pio didn't just challenge the forces of darkness. He challenged the comfort zones of the Church and the systems that preferred miracles stay theoretical. There are letters, preserved and hidden for decades, suggesting that high-ranking Church officials feared how disruptive Padre Pio's supernatural gifts could become. They feared mass hysteria. They feared power slipping out of clerical hands and into something unpredictable, the mystical. One memo sent during his investigation warned, "This man inspires dangerous devotion. He must be observed, perhaps silenced. But there's more. Some accounts suggest that Padre Pio received prophetic revelations about the future of the Church, messages he never publicly disclosed, but that were recorded by close confidants. In them, he warned of spiritual apathy, internal corruption, and a great trial that would come upon the body of Christ. According to some, he foresaw a time when many priests would fall, when seminaries would grow cold, and when true faith would be preserved not in institutions, but in hidden, humble souls. These messages were controversial, and many within the Church denied or dismissed them. But those who knew Padre Pio best, those he called his spiritual children, preserved them quietly, believing they were meant for the future. He also reportedly spoke of a coming purification, a time when the Church would be stripped of everything superfluous, reduced to its bare essence, so that what remained would be wholly God's. Another mystery surrounds his bilocation. Beyond the countless testimonies of people across the world claiming to have seen him appear to them, there's one Vatican document, never officially released, that speaks of a high-ranking cleric encountering Padre Pio in Rome while he was supposedly confined in San Giovanni Rotondo. When asked how he arrived, Pio allegedly smiled and said, "Where there is a soul in need, God provides the way." What do you do with a man who seems to exist beyond space and time? Some say the Vatican buried parts of his testimony, sanitized elements of his life to make canonization more palatable. Others believe the full truth about Padre Pio has yet to be revealed. But one thing is clear. He was feared not just because he bled like Christ, but because he spoke like a prophet. And prophets have always made people uncomfortable. The hidden truths about Padre Pio remain scattered, in private letters, in dusty archives, in testimonies that never made it to Rome. Perhaps one day they will be revealed. Until then, we are left with a question. What if Padre Pio's life was not just a comfort to the suffering, but a warning to the world? As we stand at the edge of Padre Pio's story, it's time to step back and ask a deeper question. What does his life mean for us? Padre Pio didn't seek fame. He didn't set out to build a movement. He simply said yes to God, again and again, in silence, in pain, and in the depths of mystery. And somehow, that silent yes changed the world. It's easy to admire saints from afar, to light candles and hang their images on walls, but the real invitation, what truly honors their legacy, is to allow their life to confront ours. What if Padre Pio's courage is calling out to your fear? What if his obedience is challenging your compromises? What if his relentless trust is whispering to your anxious, doubting soul? This isn't just a biography, it's a spiritual mirror. Because maybe you too have a wound no one sees. Maybe you've carried pain silently, wondering if God has noticed. Maybe the noise of the world has drowned out the whisper of heaven. Padre Pio shows us that God does not need perfection. He needs surrender. He needs souls who will stand in the gap, who will offer their wounds as altars, who will love in silence, trust in the dark, and cling to hope when nothing makes sense. You don't need to be a mystic. You don't need to bear the stigmata. You need only to say, "Yes, Lord, use me." This world is starving for truth, for authenticity, for holiness that burns without applause. What if your prayer today became that kind of fire? What if you started with this simple question, "Lord, how do you want to use me?" That's where awakening begins. Maybe this video isn't just a tribute to Padre Pio. Maybe it's a divine nudge for you to rise, to return to confession, to pick up the rosary, to fast, to forgive, to walk the harder path. Not because it's easy, but because that's where Christ walks, and that's where saints are made. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs souls who carry heaven inside them. And now you know, one of them was named Pio. What if you were next? Thank you for walking this journey with us, through mystery, through suffering, through holiness. Padre Pio's life is more than a story. It's a call to prayer, a call to sacrifice, a call to awaken. We've seen the boy from Pietrelcina become a man of God whose wounds echoed Christ's. We've watched him suffer, heal, weep, and remain hidden, all while changing lives across the world. But now the question shifts from him to you. How will you respond? Maybe this video stirred something in you. Maybe it challenged you, comforted you, or convicted you. Here's what I invite you to do next. Leave a comment below sharing what touched you the most. Even a simple phrase like, "Padre Pio, pray for me," can be an act of faith, a spark of transformation. If you're in need of prayer, write it in the comments. This is a space of intercession, a family of faith. Let us pray with you and for you. If this video moved your heart, click the like button. It helps more people discover the life of Padre Pio and the power of God working through him. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We create content that nourishes your soul, strengthens your faith, and reminds you that holiness is not distant. It's your calling. Share this video with someone who's struggling, someone who needs hope, someone who needs to remember that saints still walk with us. And finally, reflect on this question. What would my life look like if I really said yes to God? Because Padre Pio did. And through him, the world saw Jesus again. Let's not just admire saints, let's become one. May Padre Pio intercede for you. May God bless you. And may your journey to holiness begin right now. See you in the next video.